November 8, 1891, The Morning Herald, Baltimore, Maryland. The Moon Hoax. A clever yarn that fooled 2 continents. What the box in the cornerstone of the Brooklyn Institute were called. Richard Adams Locke's fanciful telescope and the marvels it revealed. When the workmen who are tearing down the old Brooklyn Institute building removed the cornerstone, they found underneath it a leaden box which had been placed there at the time the building was erected. This box was taken to the mayor's office by the officers of the Institute, and there opened in the presence of a number of old Brooklynites, and notably in the presence of ex-Mayor Hunter, who saw the box deposited under the cornerstone on October 31, 1835. The box is of lead, about 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 6 inches deep. On being broken open, it was found to contain a number of coins and pamphlets, all of which had suffered greatly from dampness and mold. The coins are believed by Professor Hooper of the Brooklyn Institute to be old Jewish shekels. When they shall have been cleaned, it will be possible to identify them beyond a doubt. The box contained no United States coins, and no document telling what was the ceremony at the laying of the cornerstone. There were copies of several New York papers dated October 31, 1835, and a number of other things, including a large colored engraving of Jacob Patchen, the last of the leather breeches, from whom Patchen Street, Brooklyn, was named. But the most curious of all the contents of the leaden box were 2 large engravings and a pamphlet. These purported to be an account and illustrations of lunar animals and other objects discovered by Sir John Herschel in his observatory at the Cape of Good Hope. It was nothing more or less than the celebrated Moon Hoax of 1835 rising from its grave, and it arose so successfully that the next day several morning newspapers referred to the engravings as illustrating discoveries made in Africa by Sir John Herschel. The Moon Hoax was probably one of the most successful hoaxes ever perpetrated on an unsuspecting public. Sir John Herschel, the astronomer, had gone down to the Cape of Good Hope to make observations of the moon. This much was authentically known, but of the exact nature of the observation and of the instruments to be used, there was not much known, either in England or this country. It was not very difficult, therefore, to make the people believe almost anything, as long as it had a certain amount of scientific consistency. Richard Adams Locke, at that time an editor of the New York Sun, conceived the idea of perpetrating a gigantic hoax, and he set about doing it in a very careful way. He published an article in the Sun, a pamphlet reprint of which was the one found in the box under this cornerstone, purporting to be a reprint from a letter written by Sir John Herschel to the Edinburgh Journal of Science. It was entitled, "Great Astronomical Discoveries Lately Made by Sir John Herschel, LL.D., F.R.S., and etc., at the Cape of Good Hope," and was accompanied by the engravings reprinted herewith. The pamphlet opened with the following boast. In this unusual addition to our journal, we have the happiness of making known to the British public, and thence to the whole civilized world, recent discoveries in astronomy, which will build an imperishable monument to the age in which we live, and confer upon the present generation of the human race a proud distinction through all future time. It has been poetically said that the stars of heaven are the hereditary regalia of man as the intellectual sovereign of the animal creation. He may now fold the zodiac around him with a loftier consciousness of his mental supremacy. Then followed an account of how Sir John's expedition had been organized, and a statement of the funds furnished by well-known scientists, and even by the heir to the British throne. The telescope was minutely and scientifically described. It consisted of a huge lens weighing 14,826 pounds, which cast an image on a canvas from which it was magnified 42,000 times by a microscope. To make the outlines clear, artificial light was transfused through the microscope. The description of this telescope was so good that a number of scientific journals were deceived into believing it to be true. Objects on the moon were said to be brought into proximity equal to 80 terrestrial yards. When this had been accomplished, the pamphlet went on to state, most wonderful things were seen on the surface of the moon. There were vegetation, animals, and things resembling human beings, The latter were thus described. They averaged 4 feet in height, were covered, except on the face, with short and glossy copper-colored hair, and had wings composed of a thin membrane without hair, lying snugly upon their backs from the top of the shoulders to the calves of the legs. The face, which was of a yellowish flesh color, was a slight improvement on that of the orangutan, being more open and intelligent in its expression and having a much greater expansion of forehead. One of the engravings accompanying the pamphlet showed a lunar scene with these wonderful inhabitants flying about. Lunar animals were also to be seen gamboling by the side of a lunar river. The other engraving showed a lunar temple. This was supposed to be a fane of devotion or of science. It was an equiangular temple built of polished sapphire or of some resplendent blue stone, which, like it, displayed a myriad points of golden light, twinkling and scintillating in the sunbeams. The roof was composed of some yellow metal and divided into compartments, which were not triangular planes, inclining to the center, but subdivided, curved and separated, so as to represent a mass of violently agitated planes. The account then went on to tell of how the lunar inhabitants sat around under the trees near the temple, eating red fruit that grew on the lunar trees. These beings were even polite and offered one another large specimens of the dainties. It seems preposterous that anyone should have believed this wonderful story, or that the press could have thought that Sir John Herschel had actually written such a letter. But it was printed and reprinted, discussed among scientists, and widely believed. It was not until Sir John published an authentic account of his observations that all faith in the hoax was abandoned. Then the author of the hoax was sought after. Many thought that it was an astronomer named Nicolet who had fled from France in 1830, so likely were the astronomical details of the hoax, but it eventually became known that Richard Adams Locke had written the marvelous tale. Mr. Locke was also the author of another hoax known as the Lost Manuscript of Mungo Park. November 30, 1924. The Delmarva Star, Wilmington, Delaware. The Moon Hoax. One of the cleverest hoaxes ever perpetrated upon the public was that which appeared in the New York Sun in 1835, purporting to give the details of the apparatus invented by the celebrated astronomer Sir John Herschel, and by which he was supposed to have been able to study all kinds of queer and unusual things on the moon. This telescope was, according to the newspaper article, located at the Cape of Good Hope, and it was supposed to have been employed for the first time on the night of January 10, 1835. The first things observed were basaltic rocks covered with poppies, then amethyst mountains and emerald valleys, in which grazed animals like bison, unicorn goats, pelican, and sheep. Strange winged creatures were seen to light upon a plateau, with bodies like those of a human being and wings like a bat. Such, with a wealth of detail, was the narrative which astounded all America and elicited many expressions of profound respect for the scientific genius which could perfect an instrument as powerful as the Herschel telescope. The New York Times declared that the dispatch displayed the most extensive and accurate knowledge of astronomy and had an air of intense verisimilitude. An editorial in the Albany Daily Advertiser referred to reading the article with unspeakable emotions of pleasure and astonishment, while the New Yorker considered the discoveries of astounding interest, creating a new era in astronomy and science generally. The hoax was reprinted in pamphlet form and, although by this time its falsity had been discovered, an edition of 60,000 copies was readily sold, and one result of this widespread publicity was to prevent Edgar Allan Poe from completing his serial, Hans Pfaall's Journey to the Moon, which was then appearing in the Southern Literary Messenger. Having read the moon story to an end, said Poe, and found it anticipative of all the main points of my Hans Pfaall, I suffered the latter to remain unfinished. I did not even think it advisable to bring my voyager back to his parent Earth. He can stay where I left him and is, I believe, the real man in the moon. Poe himself was suspected of being the author of the moon hoax, but denied this upon many occasions, while the French astronomer Nicolet was also credited with having conceived it. Richard Allan Locke a New York journalist is generally thought to have written the original Moon story, but the true authorship of the hoax has never been definitely settled. Copyright